Police officers, what's the dumbest thing you saw a criminal do? Story 1. These are my pants, but those are not my pockets. Can't make this crap up. I was so new at the time I didn't have a witty response, I just chuckled and kept searching for him. I think what he meant to say was that everything in his pockets, cigarettes, ID, lighter, keys was all his, but the baggie of meth was not. But who am I to make assumptions? The man said they weren't his pockets, so they weren't his pockets. One of my favorite Cops episodes was about a guy who stopped and pulled some drugs out of his pants, and his response was, "These aren't my pants." The cop then said, "Oh, and whose pants are they? And why are you wearing them?" The guy said, "I don't know." Such a funny story. I once borrowed some jeans from a friend before going on a road trip to see my girlfriend. I get pulled over for speeding like an idiot and the cop decides he's going to take me in, but do me a solid and not tarnish my record because I was on leave from deployment. Here's where it gets crazy. I had known my buddy dabbled in X but never paid any mind, and when he's checking my pockets he finds 2 pills. There I am thinking how the heck am I going to explain that this crap isn't mine, let alone the pants? Turns out it was ibuprofen when they checked. Story 2. A friend's daughter and daughter's boyfriend get busted with a kilo of weed. The friend's daughter says, "Oh, we weren't going to smoke it, we were going to sell it." I kid you not, a kid at my school actually said that to a teacher. We had a really cool old guy who taught languages, and he did his best to look out for us. He was a guy that you could talk to about most things. So in our final year, he pulls the worst of the stoners aside and says, "Now Tom, if you want to do well in your exams, you need to smoke a lot less weed the next few months." "It's okay, sir," said Tom. "I just bought an ounce and I'm not going to smoke any of it. I'm just going to sell it." They did let Tom graduate, but when they called his name, he was so wasted that he fell off the stage. We laughed at him, but it's a sad image looking back. I had a client once who did something similar. When caught with a misdemeanor amount of cocaine, his defense to the officer was, "I wasn't going to use it all, I'm going to a party and I was going to share it with my friends." Boom, felony possession with intent to distribute. Probably the dumbest client I ever had. He was caught because despite seeing a cop parked across the street from the drug house, he went in and made his purchase. Then he noticed said cop following him, but still ran a stop sign. He then proceeded to not only consent to a search of his car, but actually told the cop where the drugs were hidden. Story 3. DUI trial, the defendant chooses to represent herself. She tries to introduce evidence during the trial, but is quickly blocked by the prosecution. The judge, may be taking pity on the flaming train wreck that was this woman's defense, asks to see the evidence. It was a receipt from the bar she left before I stopped her that showed that she purchased 2 large margaritas. Her whole defense was, "I couldn't have been drunk after only 2 margaritas." She was found guilty. My initial reason for stopping her was that she drove down an embankment on the side of the road to get to a McDonald's drive-thru. Every time I hear or read the defendant chose to represent themselves, I know it's not going to end well for them. I think people see the court on TV and think they can wing it. Then they start talking. They have no idea how badly they are setting themselves up for the prosecution. I want to describe it more, but I can't because I'm not a lawyer and I just don't know. The law is like calculus and chess put together, and lawyers are the math wizards that understand and use it like Merlin. I bet the prosecution was thinking, "Damn, I'm glad the judge overruled my objection." Concrete evidence, including the suspect's testimony that she was just drinking before driving, is kind of a slam dunk. The one thing she can't prove at that point is that her alcohol tolerance or whatever is so high that she wasn't intoxicated. I've defended myself in court a few times. No legal school, nothing. Just common sense and very good manners. Also, it helps to turn up in a suit rather than jeans and a t-shirt, since it shows you're making an effort. I had blue LED lights fitted to my car for a show, and a cop issued a ticket for blue emergency lights fitted to a vehicle. As they went as he described the emergency, I went to court. The judge immediately told me to go read up on the law, make a case, and come back in 6 months. Fast forward 6 months, I'm stood before the very same judge with a crap ton of paperwork, notes, books, etc. My case was crap and I'm sure they all laughed at me, but I managed to get my original $70 fine reduced to a $15 court cost, all because the wording I used ruined my case. Although I now know what lights I can and can't have, also legally can have undercar neons as long as they fade from white at the front to the red on the rear, etc. It was a productive 6 months, and I'm grateful the judge gave me 6 months to make a case. I was on the national board of my frat, and we discovered that someone had started a group of pledges with doctored transcripts. We don't want people to join and then fail out of school, so we have a minimum GPA standard. Almost the entire chapter disavowed knowledge of the falsified documents, and then one guy says to us, "It's just a GPA, does it even really matter?" It's not like this is the first time I did it. We asked him, "It's not the first time you did what exactly?" He says, "Photoshopped a transcript. I did it a bunch of times. The whole chapter knew, too. We had a meeting to discuss doing this." The entire chapter was suspended for a year, except the new guys who were told the chapter applied for a GPA exemption and received it, and the guy who admitted to falsifying documents was suspended to 10 years, basically not stripped of his letters, but wouldn't be able to be involved in anything. After all this, that moron didn't understand how he got caught and singled out. Story 4. Retired cop here. Boy, do I have stories. One dumbass move a guy did was he steals some poor girl's car. It was her first car, she worked full-time. It was a sweet little thing, and we felt so bad. She was crushed. Also in the car, for some reason, was her cell phone, so a colleague who has the gift of talking smack really well calls the number. Dude answers. It goes a little something like this. Cop. "Dumbass, you stole my girlfriend's car." Bad guy. "Bitch, I will F you up, and then F your bitch." Cop. "Bring it on. No cops, no friends, me and you. I'm at the Chevron on Main Street in 5th. Pussy, I'm calling your bitch ass out. Bitch, I'm on my way." Click. Me. No freaking way he's coming. The dude rounded the corner and pulled into the gas station. We hit our cars behind it, and then when he parked, we boxed him in. He had a gun, too. Freaking idiot. On probation, I had a loaded gun. Come to us. To answer a few questions, yes, he showed up in the stolen car with a freaking shaved key in the ignition he used to steal it. Because people liked it so much, I talked to the original cop who has the gift of talking smack. He said a few months later in court the guy claimed the gun was not his. We found it under the driver's seat. He said it must be hers. So messed up, but the jury didn't buy it. We saw him shoving something from his waist under his seat when he saw us. Also, yes, the look on his face was classic. It went from "I'm gonna kill this dude" to the look a prey animal gets when it knows it's screwed. He was killed a few years later in a chase in another stolen car. Was ejected. DOA. New story. Okay, I will give you all another. This one was kind of a circumstance that involved me, LOL. So working one busy Saturday night, there was a huge brawl with about 20 bros in front of a club. You know, affliction shirts, tap-out shirts, and Monster Energy hats with flat bills galore, LOL. So we get there and start grabbing dudes, searching real quick, then stuffing them in the nearest car, then jumping back into the fray because we were fighting with them too. So it all dies down, and immediately we get a call. I forget what it was, but we gotta go, lights and sirens to it. I ran to my car, nobody was in it. Sweet, I get to go! So I jumped in my car and I'm hauling ass, lights and siren, to this new call for a few minutes. Apexing turns at 2 a.m. and foggy, not really anyone on the roads. Remember that, it's 2 a.m. and it's foggy. So I'm rolling down this street in the fog with my lights and a siren, and I see an object with a hoodie on its head slowly slide up behind me in my rear view. The jail's that way. Where are you taking me? I was going fairly fast on a straightaway and I nearly freaking stacked it up into a pole when I was scared. I jerked the wheel and a little pee came out, I do admit. I pulled over and had to pace a few minutes outside the car to calm down, so the guy was stuffed into my car by some other officer, and because he was drunk, he just laid down on the floorboards, put his hoodie on and passed out. I woke him up by yanking and banking and slamming him into the doors of the car, LOL. I took him back to the club and no officer claimed him, so I just took the dude home and we laughed about it the whole way. I told him I totally peed. Dated a cop back in the day, we'd meet up for breakfast after our shifts ended. As I was a bartender at the time, I liked hearing his stories of arresting idiots. I remember one of them pretty clearly. A woman called the cops on her own car. She'd picked up her brother and a bunch of his friends from the bar as their DD ditched them. As she's driving down the expressway in her old suburban home, she notices a strange smell. The dude in the back is smoking crack. If you're wondering why it smells like candy, I got enough to share with you guys. The woman had just landed her dream job, so she was freaking out that there was a crackhead with drugs in her car. Calls the cops and asks them to search her car to make sure the dude didn't leave any of his candy behind. They almost had to arrest her too because she was gonna beat the crap out of her idiot brother right there on the interstate. Cops thankfully didn't give her any tickets or anything, but they did end up calling a cab for her brother and his friends. She left their asses right there on the side of I-55. At 4 a.m. in February. Story 5. My brother, a Detroit cop, told me this. They get a call from someone reporting their car was stolen. They show up and it turns out someone had already stolen the tires off the car. Then a different group stole the actual car. They pushed it 2 blocks without tires and left perfect grooves in the street all the way to their garage. Their defense was, "But we didn't steal the tires." Detroit. When we rob you, we really rob you. One of my childhood friends grew up to be a real idiot and pulled something similar. He had started breaking into houses in the neighborhood. Now, this is a woodsy neighborhood with very few residents, so already not a smart idea. Anyhow, he had somehow learned that the neighbor on the next street had a coin collection worth thousands of dollars. He waited for the residents to leave, punched through their window, cutting his hand and some nerves, and dragged the collection out. Apparently the coins weighed a couple of £100 altogether. So he and his cohort dragged them all the way back to his house, on the next street, over a dirt road. Unfortunately for them, the neighbor gave them the ultimatum to give it all back if he didn't call the cops. Unfortunately for them, neither one ever smartened up. Story 6. My boyfriend is a police officer. Last week, he pulled over a drunk driver who ended up speeding off. Car chases back to his house and the drunk guy tells him, "I got home, it's okay, you can go now." The drunk guy continues arguing and it's 3 a.m., so his family wakes up, his son steps out to the front porch and yells, "Damn it, Dad, you freaking idiot, we told you to stop doing this." I worked with a guy who got a DUI cooking breakfast in his kitchen. He was out late at a bar, got home, and decided to make some breakfast. As he's cooking, he hears something behind him and turns to see 3 cops in his kitchen. He asks what they're doing, and they say they got a call from a neighbor and are doing a wellness check. He tells them he's fine. The cops ask if he'd just driven home, and he says yes. They informed him his front door was open and asked him to step out front. His car was parked in the middle of the yard, and he had run over his own mailbox. They ask him to blow, and he puts up a .19, straight to jail. Someone my family knew got drunk out in front of a small grocery store and someone threatened to call the cops. He left and made it home without hurting anyone. The police knocked on his door, the person reported his plate number, and they didn't arrest him because they couldn't prove he was intoxicated at the time of the report. This was back in the 90s in front of a mom-and-pop shop, so no fancy cameras or cellular devices, or top-of-the-line traffic cams. So many of them think that home is the base, so they can't be tagged out. I was on a ride-along with my husband. I rode with him on holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, really as often as his sergeant would let me. When a call went out about a drunk driver driving through yards, guy crossed the intersection right in front of us and it was on. Half a block later, this was in a neighborhood in Houston. The guy pulls into a driveway, jumps out of his car, and starts drunkenly yelling, "I'm at my house! I'm at my house! You can't arrest me!" Turns out, he was a pizza delivery driver who had a box of wine as his co-pilot. He was also a student at the local high school, and he just happened to be driving a popular make, model, and year car. Yep. 4 other students got arrested because they were drunk and happened to get stopped because they were driving the same type of car. It was the best thing ever when they all met each other while waiting to blow. The pizza guy was bitching about how unfair it was to his buddies that he knew from school. I do not doubt that he got his ass kicked when they all got out and were back at school. Extra bonus, that was literally the first night that running from the cops was a state jail felony in Texas. I don't know if the kid was charged under that law. He was 18, and this wasn't the first time he'd been arrested for alcohol-related issues, but he sure was crying about it by the time he got to jail. Story 7. Not a cop, but a corrections officer. 2 inmates got into a fight in a hallway. I was the closest to them and only saw the start of the fight out of the corner of my eye. In my report, I wrote, "I saw the 2 inmates fall to the ground with name on top of another inmate." Later, the hearing sergeant was reading the report to one of the inmates so they could dispute any facts in the report they felt were untrue or biased. He asked the inmate if they wanted to dispute any facts in my report. The inmate said, "Yeah, we didn't fall to the ground. I grabbed the other inmate and slammed his ass onto the floor." What would have been a simple fighting charge turned into an assault charge. But to this day, his manly pride is still intact. His legend lives on through your story. His stupidity as well. I work in a therapeutic court for addicts, and we had a guy pop for meth and marijuana. His response to the probation officer's reading of the report was, "Okay, yeah, I did meth, but I don't smoke pot. I didn't smoke pot, I smoked meth, but not pot." That was back in August, and we see him every 2 weeks. But his attorney keeps continuing his show cause matter, so every 2 weeks the probation officer reads the same report, and every 2 weeks the guy adamantly refuses to admit he smoked pot, in a state where it's legal recreationally. Meth, though. Story 8. "Sir, can I see your driver's license?" "I don't have one." "Then why were you driving?" "I wasn't traveling." There are hundreds of videos of this on the internet. There are a lot of sovereign citizens. They're people so stupid they think they're smart, kind of like anti-vaxxers, and they all say this same idiotic thing, "I'm not driving, I'm traveling," with this smug-ass grin, like those are the magic words to say to the police that makes it okay to drive without a license or registration. My shop sells beer and wine. We card everyone. I almost broke out laughing when this guy handed me this fake-ass ID that said private citizen of the land. The kicker was that he then tried to use his voter registration card as ID, which we don't accept anyway. For those not aware, sovereign citizens argue they aren't citizens of the United States, but this guy is a registered voter for our state. My friend got pulled over once, this is in the UK, at the height of his being slightly unhinged phase. He was driving an uninsured, untaxed Vauxhall Corsa with an expired MOT and no seatbelt on with 4 passengers about 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. Having done some research on the concept of being a freeman of the land, he tried his luck. First, he stated he did not consent to being searched. He ultimately agreed to empty his pockets on the ground. They did not contain anything considered illegal, and that he chose to do so of his own free will. Because he was driving an uninsured vehicle, he then stated he did not consent to his vehicle being seized. A similar "I was traveling, not driving" argument was attempted and failed. Anyway, because of the multiple offenses, he was summoned to appear in the magistrate's court some weeks later. When called to approach, he remained sitting and stated, "I will approach the bench, but only if the court recognizes that I do so of my own free will and volition." There was a bit of back and forth where he tried to claim the court was fraudulent, was under maritime law, and all that normal sort of bollocks these idiots spout. I was there to observe. It was hilarious. The court ultimately adjourned the case for a month to give him time to research common law, with the magistrate suggesting that he start with the Magna Carta and go from there. Surprisingly enough, he didn't ultimately win and was fined about $1,000. The car was crushed and he got 6 points on his license. Sadly, our local news site no longer has the story archived because they are utterly crap. It made for an amusing read. Story 9. Arrested a guy for shooting heroin in the parents' room of a shopping center. Walked in while he had the needle in his arm. We stare at each other for a bit, and then he comes out with, "I'm, diabetic?" I cuff him and leave my partner to do the search while I read caution and rights. Old mate is not diabetic, and we know this because he's got 87 prior convictions for the use, possession, and trafficking of drugs. I go through the usual "you do not have to say or do anything" spiel, then say, "Do you understand these rights?" He's totally cooked on heroin at this point, and he just looks at me and goes, "You want to get dinner tonight?" It's not the worst response I've had to caution and rights, though. Arresting people for drug use is ridiculous. 87 prior convictions and nothing has changed, but money spent hand over fist. I get it's the law, but the money would be better spent treating than arresting. Just my opinion. Arresting in circumstances of drug use, especially in public spaces, is used to prevent them from continuing to do it. The people we arrest for using are usually brought back to the station to detox or taken to the hospital, then referred to drug rehabilitation programs and/or set up with shelter if they need it. Arresting doesn't always mean they go to jail, or that they even end up with a criminal charge. I personally would much rather get them into rehab than have them go to jail. It's pointless. It wastes money and it does nothing other than add to their rap sheet, especially when, as you said, they continue to do it once they get out. It doesn't actually address any of the social or psychological issues that could be at play. I've never been to court over someone with a use drug of dependence charge. Having said that, this is Australia, and I'm not sure how different our laws are compared to laws in the US or elsewhere. Prevention would be taking the money spent on law enforcement and criminalizing people who use drugs and putting it into harm reduction, like supervised injection sites so people don't have to shoot up in public, and expanding access to treatment. Related, we talk about HIV and Hep C as risks from drug use, but they aren't. They are the results of drug policy. How many diabetics do you know who contracted HIV or Hep C from injecting their insulin? How many had a fatal or near-fatal reaction to their insulin because it was of an unknown purity or potency? HIV and Hep C have no innate attraction to illicit substances, and there is little pharmacological difference between legal opioid pain medication and illegal opioids, other than policies surrounding them and the societal view or stigma. I'm glad to hear that Australia is slightly more progressive regarding referring people who use drugs to treatment, but if it is abstinence-oriented treatment or withdrawal management alone, you should know that those treatments are proven to be not just ineffective for most people, but actually increase the risk of fatal overdose as people relapse soon after release, with a much lower tolerance. Some other questions: do Australian prisoners have needle sharing programs? Do prisoners receive access to evidence-based treatment for addiction such as methadone and buprenorphine? Those things are steps towards prevention. Another thing that improves outcomes of addiction treatment is employment. Do you think that Australian law enforcement has done that individual or the public a service by racking up all those minor drug charges? I bet it'll be really easy for him to get a job if he ever does enter treatment. Story 10. I stopped someone who was in the area of a load of theft from motor vehicles. After a bit of questioning, I carried out a search and found numerous wallets, phones, etc. He claimed that all of the cards were his, all 13 different identities. To be fair, he stuck to his story. He carried it all the way to court, going not guilty. Reminds me of a story a buddy who made fake IDs told me. He made like 12 different ID cards for himself for some reason, and then one day he got into an accident. So then he has all 12 cards laid out on the seat next to him trying to find his real ID card when he hears a tap on the window and sees the cop looking down at him and his 12 ID cards. Needless to say, he got into a lot of trouble for that one. Story 11. My ex to the cop who pulled him and his friends over. I'm so freaking high right now. I had a friend back in the day who earned the name DUI Don because he was driving a girl home after some partying one night. She was wasted and he was only high as balls. Gets pulled over, could easily say that he's sober, happy to blow into the tube, etc. and get out of it. The first thing he says to the cop is, "I'm gonna level with you. I'm really high." Spent that night in jail. The cherry on this, and the reason I know the full details of it all, is because the girl with him was 17. And, bonus, homeless. When she didn't have anywhere else to go, she gave them my address, an 18-year-old living alone, and I got to become her temporary legal guardian. Awesome night. Thanks, DUI Don. I once got high at the beach with a friend and saw a pervert a little way away jerking off at us. I was high enough to call the police. My friend just wanted to leave and would have done the same if I were in the same frame of mind. And I was also high enough to say, "God, I'm high," right before I got off the phone with the dispatcher. Thankfully, this was in California, so nothing came of it, but my friend gave me the most disappointed look of anyone ever. Kinda the same thing happened to my friends. There were 4 of them driving from the western part of my country to the eastern part. 3 of them were sober, but the one was super high. They get pulled over, a cop approaches the car, gets to the window, smells the weed and asks, "Oh, I see you guys have been smoking." And that one high friend says, "Not me, officer." They were all taken to the police station and later got fined and 6 months probation. About a month ago, I was smoking a joint outside the hotel I was at. Police rolled past and I extinguished it and put it in my pocket. I had weed in my other pocket too. A minute later, they walked around the corner and shined their flashlights in my eyes and asked me what I was doing, and said I looked like I was on drugs. I said, well, I was just smoking a joint when you rolled past. Are you telling me you have cannabis on you? One of them said. I said, well, I have a half-smoked joint in my pocket, yeah, as I pulled it out of my pocket and showed him. The officer said, well, obviously I'm confiscating that. I said, yeah, fair enough, and gave it to him. That was the end of it. He didn't ask to search me or anything. I only said what I said because I know the police in my city are cool. This is the UK, so yes, it is still illegal. If you're cool with the police, they generally don't give a crap. I mean, it was just a joint. Not worth anyone's time going any further than he did. Story 12. Dispatcher. Had a guy call in and tell us that he's currently violating the protective order by being with his ex who is pregnant by him. Wants us to call the judge and get it dismissed so they can go inside the restaurant and eat. The officer is standing next to my partner who answered the call and asks the guys where he is so that we can send the judge to him. The guy hangs up. My best friend had a restraining order against her ex-hairdresser because he went a little crazy and was stalking her. After he got the restraining order, he waited for her at her apartment and knocked on her car window to talk about it. She didn't leave the car, locked all the doors, and told him she was calling the cops. He literally waited. Cops showed up and asked him what he was doing, and he just said he wanted to talk to her about this, hence defeating the whole purpose of the restraining order. He was then arrested. It got crazier, and he ended up in jail again for longer for attempting kidnapping of my BFF, and he had child porn on his computer. Story 13. The woman is waiting for her DUI trial in the courtroom. The lawyers and judge are milling around and getting their paperwork in order. The trial starts in 10 to 15 minutes. The prosecuting attorney asks her if she wants to take the plea deal one last time. She refuses and goes on about how this is unconstitutional and the police and courts are corrupt, and how she is going to take her kid to school, blah blah blah. She is starting to cause a bit of a scene, yelling, acting like a child, and just being generally annoying. Someone in the room gets a whiff of alcohol. She is out on bond, so she can basically be given a PBT at any time for any reason. The judge orders one on her. She registers a 0.226 in court. This woman, who was on trial for DUI, had the audacity to drive to court drunk, and then moan and groan about how she isn't being treated fairly and we're all corrupt, and this is unconstitutional. Not only that, but it explicitly states in your bond conditions that you cannot consume alcohol, so I cuff her and bring her to jail. She's still running her mouth during the walk over. I had nothing to say. I had absolutely zero sympathy for her. I could barely hold in my laughter on the walk over to the jail. I have kind of a similar story. A friend of my buddy's was in the police academy to become a state trooper. Part of the training is to learn how to identify DUI or OUI behavior. To do this, they ask the cadets to bring a few friends and some alcohol, so they can practice field sobriety tests using the breathalyzer, etc. The cadets have to pick them up and ensure they get home safely. My buddy and I don't have much else going on this Saturday morning, and an excuse to start drinking at 9 a.m. sounds fun. Now, my buddy works nights as a bouncer/bartender, and it wasn't unusual for the staff to hang around after hours boozing, and the night before wasn't so different. In fact, when his friend went to give him the breathalyzer to get a baseline, he blew a 0.09. He was still drunk from the night before. They made him sit by himself in a room for an hour or so while the rest of us cracked beers and caught up. He had the saddest look on his face as he sat there by himself, listening to us get hammered in the room next door. Story 14. In a city near to me, a guy murdered a woman, put her body in a large garment bag, and left her in a vacant lot. Unfortunately for him, he forgot to take the tags with his name and address off the bag from a recent flight. A would-be bank robber wrote his hold-up note and put it into his wallet. He got rattled at the bank and accidentally left his driver's license on the counter when he handed the note to the teller. A third crook just took on more than he could handle and apparently didn't watch the time. He had a long history of Grand Theft Auto and was hospitalized after being badly beaten in the parking lot of a sports area after a lacrosse game. The guy swore up and down that he had no idea why anyone would assault him there. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.